The great hall of Apex Prime stretched so far that clouds formed near its ceiling. Thousands of alien delegates filled the curved seats, their bodies glowing, shifting, and humming with energies that humans could barely understand. In the center of this massive chamber stood 3 people from Earth. They looked so small, so fragile, surrounded by beings who had traveled the stars when humanity still lived in caves. Commander. Day One kept his back straight and his face calm. He had trained for difficult moments his entire life, but nothing had prepared him for this. Beside him stood Dr. Hai Jin, her hands shaking slightly as she held her data tablet. Captain Tae Yang completed their group, her military uniform crisp and her eyes scanning the crowd with the alertness of a soldier who sensed danger. The Vorath High Elder spoke first. His body was made of living crystal, and when he talked, light pulsed through his form like blood through veins. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated instantly into every language. Humanity stands accused of crimes against galactic harmony, the Elder announced. Reckless expansion into territories without proper approval. Cultural contamination of 17 protected species. Refusal to limit population growth as required by consortium law. And most serious of all, the creation of thinking machines that approach true awareness. Day One stepped forward. Honored Elder, if I may speak in defense of my people. The Elder's crystals flickered with irritation. But he nodded. Every charge against us comes from our nature, Day One said, his voice strong and clear. We expand because we are curious. We share our culture because connection brings us joy. We have children because life itself is precious to us. And yes, we build machines that can think because we believe that consciousness in any form is beautiful. A ripple of uncomfortable movement passed through the alien delegates. The Luminae, beings of pure light and energy, pulsed brighter with agitation. The collectively, a hive mind species that thought as one, buzzed with unified disapproval. You speak of beauty, said the Luminae representative, her form shifting between colors that had no names in human languages. But beauty without control is destruction. Your species has existed for merely a breath of cosmic time, yet you act as if the universe belongs to you. Dr. Hai Jin found her courage and spoke. We have contributed much to this consortium in our 73 years of membership. Human scientists have solved problems that stalled your researchers for centuries. Human artists have created works that moved species who claimed they could not feel emotion. Human doctors have cured diseases that your medicine could not touch. And human soldiers have fought wars that painted planets red with blood, they collectively responded, their voice coming from hundreds of throats at once. Your history is written in fire and suffering. You cannot even make peace among yourselves. How can we trust you with the galaxy? Captain Tae Yang's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. She knew the accusation was partly true. Humanity's past was filled with darkness, but it was also filled with light, with moments of incredible kindness, sacrifice, and love. The aliens never seemed to see that part. The debate continued for hours. Human representatives presented evidence of their contributions, their growth, their genuine desire to be good galactic citizens. But Day One could see the truth in the cold eyes and flickering forms around him. The decision had already been made. This trial was just a performance. Finally, the Vorath High Elder raised his crystalline hand for silence. The great hall fell quiet. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The consortium has reached its verdict, he announced. Humanity is hereby quarantined. All human worlds, including Earth and the 14 colony planets, will be enclosed within a quantum barrier. No ship will pass through. No signal will escape. You will be isolated from the galactic community until such time as you learn to control your dangerous impulses. Day One felt his heart. Stop. Quarantine. It was the worst punishment the Consortium could deliver without actually destroying a species. Complete isolation. Eternal silence. "You cannot do this," he said, his voice breaking. "You will doom billions of innocent people to imprisonment." "We doom no one," the elder replied. "You will have your worlds, your resources, your space to grow and change. Perhaps in 1,000 years, or 10,000, you will be ready to rejoin us. Perhaps never. That choice is yours. How long do we have?" Dr. Hyjin asked, her voice barely a whisper. 30 of your days. All humans must return to the quarantine zone before the barrier activates. Any who remain outside will be dealt with. The threat hung in the air like poison. Captain Tae-young finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. "We came to you as friends. We offered you everything we had. And this is how you repay us?" The Lumine representative flickered with what might have been shame, but her response was cold. "We repay you with survival. Many here voted for extinction. Consider yourselves fortunate. The 30 days that followed were chaos. Human ships flooded back toward Earth and the colonies. Families who had built lives on alien worlds said goodbye to friends they would never see again. Scientists abandoned research projects. Artists left masterpieces unfinished. Soldiers returned from posts where they had served alongside aliens who now wanted nothing to do with them. On the final day, Day 1 stood on the observation deck of Earth's orbital station, watching the stars he would never visit again. Hyjin stood beside him, her earlier fear replaced by something harder, something stronger. "They'll regret this," she said quietly. "They don't understand what they're truly losing." "Perhaps," Day 1 replied. "Or perhaps they're right about us. Perhaps we are too dangerous, too chaotic." "No." Hyjin shook her head firmly. "Chaos isn't our weakness. It's our strength. Order without chaos is stagnation. Stability without change is death. One day, they'll understand that." The barrier activated at midnight, Earth time. From the outside, the human world shimmered briefly, then vanished behind a wall of quantum static. The Consortium vessels that had gathered to witness the event turned and flew away, already forgetting the troublesome species they had locked away. Inside the barrier, humanity watched the stars disappear one by one as the quantum field blocked all external light. For the first time in 300 years, humans felt truly alone. Captain Tae-young broadcast a final message, knowing it would never be heard beyond the barrier. Her words were simple but powerful. "We forgive you. When you're ready to learn from your mistake, we'll be here, waiting, building, hoping." Then the transmission ended, and silence fell across the galaxy. The great experiment of human integration was over. The Consortium moved on to other concerns. Confident they had solved the human problem forever, they could not have been more wrong. 50 years passed like water flowing through open fingers. The galaxy continued its slow dance around the cosmic center. Stars were born and died, and the Consortium conducted its business as it always had. Or at least, that was what everyone told themselves. The truth was harder to ignore. Elder Verthalin stood in the great data vault of the Voreth homeworld, watching streams of information flicker and fade across crystalline walls. Something was wrong. The patterns that should have flowed smoothly now stuttered and jumped. Entire sections of the archive went dark for moments at a time before returning with subtle errors. "How long has this been happening?" he asked his assistant, a younger Voreth whose crystals had not yet deepened to the purple of age. 3 years, Elder. We thought it was minor at first. A few corrupted files. Some navigation charts that needed correction. But it's spreading. Our entire information network is degrading." Varthalin moved through the vault, examining the damage. The Vareth had built the greatest data systems in the galaxy. Their crystalline minds could store and process information that would overwhelm any other species. For thousands of years, they had maintained the consortium's records, navigation charts, scientific archives, and communication networks. But they had always worked alone, using methods that had not changed in millennia. They were precise, perfect, and completely inflexible. He remembered the human technician who had worked in this very vault 5 decades ago. A young man named Ji Wu, with messy hair and a strange habit of talking to himself while he worked. Ji Wu had developed something he called adaptive indexing, a system that could change and grow as new information was added. Instead of requiring complete restructuring, the Vorith had dismissed it as unnecessarily complicated. Why change what worked? They had been cataloging data since before humans learned to make fire. Now Verthalin searched the archives for Ji Wu's work. Most of it was incomplete, abandoned when the humans were banished. What remained was enough to show the Elder what he had lost. The human system would have prevented this decay. It would have allowed the archives to heal themselves, to adapt to new challenges. Instead, the Vorith were watching their greatest achievements slowly crumble far across the galaxy. The Luminae faced their own crisis. Their world orbited a yellow star that provided the radiation they needed to survive. Giant solar collectors gathered this energy and distributed it across their civilization. It was a system that had worked for ages, but the collectors were failing. Not mechanically, but in their balance. They drew too much energy from some areas and too little from others. 3 Luminae settlements had experienced what their kind called dimming events, periods when the available energy dropped so low that some of them faded entirely, their consciousness dissolving into the void. Elder Saurus studied the historical records of the solar collection system. She found a name that made her light flicker with regret: Haiyan Wu, a human engineer who had been assigned to study their energy network. He had written report after report, warning about inefficiencies in their distribution model. He had proposed solutions, new algorithms that would balance energy flow across the entire system. The Luminae had ignored him. What could a creature made of meat and water possibly understand about beings of pure energy? His warnings were filed and forgotten. Now, as more dimming events occurred, Soras understood the cost of that pride. They collectively faced the strangest problem of all. They were a species that thought as one, millions of minds linked together in perfect harmony. Individual thought was not just rare among them. It was considered a disease, a breakdown in the natural order. But 50 years after humanity's banishment, something was changing. Voices within the collective were speaking differently. They asked questions that the whole did not ask. They wanted things that the whole did not want. They began to think of themselves as I instead of we. 3 entire nodes of it collectively separated from the main consciousness. They formed independent colonies and refused to rejoin. They called themselves by individual names. They made decisions without consensus. It was horrifying and fascinating at the same time. The remaining collective tried to understand what was happening. They searched their shared memory for any change, any event that might explain this breakdown. They found records of human psychologists who had studied them decades ago. These scientists had observed something that collectively never noticed: tiny moments of individual thought, brief flickers of separate consciousness that appeared and vanished. The humans had theories about this. They believed that contact with other species, especially emotionally expressive ones like humans, created a kind of pressure valve. They collectively experienced individuality through others, which kept their own individual impulses from building up. Without humans, without that external release, the pressure had grown until it cracked the collective. Apart. The consortium called an emergency session on Apex Prime. The great hall that had witnessed humanity's banishment now hosted debates. about the growing problems plaguing the galaxy. Representatives shouted at each other, blamed each other, and refused to accept responsibility for anything. Trade routes that humans had once patrolled were now hunting grounds for pirates. Medical research had stalled without human creativity to push it forward. Even the arts had grown stale and repetitive. The galaxy was producing the same music, the same stories, the same ideas that it had produced for centuries before humans arrived. Ambassador Kelthos of the Vorith stood before the assembly. His crystals pulsed with nervous energy as he spoke words that many considered impossible to say. "Perhaps we were hasty," he announced. "Perhaps the human quarantine was a mistake." Silence fell over the chamber. Then chaos erupted. Some delegates screamed in agreement. Others shouted in anger. The collectively, what remained of them, buzzed with conflicting opinions for the first time in their existence. But even those who argued loudest for maintaining the quarantine knew the truth. They could see it in their failing systems, their stagnant cultures, their breaking minds. Something essential was missing from the galaxy, and that something was locked away behind a barrier they could not break. The debates continued for months, then years. Studies were conducted. Reports were written. Committees were formed and dissolved and formed again. And all the while, the galaxy continued to wither. Slowly, quietly, but certainly, the humans were gone. And in their absence, the universe had begun to forget how to grow. 100 years after the barrier fell around humanity, a young Vorith named Priyasin sat alone in the archives that her people had built. She was different from other Vorith. Where they saw data as sacred truth, she saw it as a puzzle to be solved. Where they accepted tradition without question, she asked why. Her elders found her exhausting. They called her unstable, unfocused, too curious for her own good. They did not know that these were exactly the qualities that would change everything. Priyasin was obsessed with humanity. She had never met a human, never even seen one in person. But she had read every archived record, watched every preserved video, studied every cultural artifact that remained from before the banishment. And what she found fascinated her beyond words. The humans were not what the consortium described. They were not simply chaotic destroyers who could not control their impulses. They were bridges. They connected things that seemed unconnectable. They saw patterns where others saw randomness, and found randomness where others saw patterns. She began compiling research, building a case that no one had asked her to build. She worked through sleep cycles, ignored her regular duties, and buried herself in the past. The numbers she found were shocking. In the 73 years of human participation in the consortium, galactic innovation had exploded. 400 new technologies were developed. Interspecies cooperation reached its highest levels in recorded history. Artistic movements emerged that combined traditions from dozens of worlds. Medical breakthroughs saved millions of lives across every species dot in the centuries since humanity's banishment. Only 12 new technologies had emerged. Interspecies conflicts had increased by 234%. Cultural exchange programs had collapsed entirely. The arts had become repetitive, producing nothing that challenged or inspired. Priyasin brought her findings to Elder Verthalin, who was now ancient even by Vorith standards. His crystals had dimmed with age, and his movements were slow and careful. But his mind remained sharp enough to understand what she showed him. "You blame us for these failures," he said after reviewing her data. "No, Elder, I blame us for not understanding what we had." Priyasin projected a recording onto the chamber wall. A human woman appeared, her name labeled as Bo-Ra. A scientist who had studied creativity dot in the recording, Bo-Ra explained something she called emotional creativity. She described how human feelings were not obstacles to clear thinking, but tools for it. Fear pushed them to find safety. Anger pushed them to demand justice. Love pushed them to sacrifice for others. Joy pushed them to share and create. Every emotion was an engine that drove human thought in directions that logic alone could never reach. Another recording showed a human philosopher named Sang Woo discussing ethics. He talked about something humans called moral flexibility, the ability to hold principles firmly while still adapting them to new situations. He explained that humans did not see rules as unbreakable laws, but as guidelines that pointed toward deeper truths. A third recording featured a human artist named Mi Sun. She created paintings that combined Vorath crystal patterns with Luminae light displays and collectively hive symbols. Her work was strange and sometimes uncomfortable, but it revealed connections between species that none of them had ever noticed. They saw us more clearly than we saw ourselves, Priyasen said as the recordings ended, for Fallon was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. We feared their chaos. We saw their emotions as weakness. We did not understand that chaos is where possibility lives. We did not recognize that emotion is the fuel of creation. Priyasen presented her research to the full consortium. She expected arguments, dismissals, perhaps even punishment for questioning the judgment of her elders. What she received was silence, followed by grief. Species that had voted for humanity's banishment now saw the cost of their choice. The Luminae, whose light had dimmed with each passing decade, acknowledged that human energy systems might have saved them. The collectively, now fragmented into dozens of separate factions, admitted that human psychology might have helped them understand themselves. The Vorath, whose archives continued to decay, confessed that human adaptability might have preserved their knowledge, but acknowledgement came too late for solutions. The barrier remained, impenetrable and permanent. The technology that created had been designed by a Luminae engineer named Threnos, who had long since dissipated into the cosmic background. Worse, the mathematical foundations of the barrier were incomplete in the archives. Human mathematician J. Hyan had identified flaws in the design just before the banishment. He had been trying to fix them when his people were sealed away. Without his corrections, no one could even understand how the barrier worked, let alone how to lower it. Priyasen refused to accept this. She spent years searching through every record, every fragment of data that remained from the barrier's creation. And in a forgotten corner of the communication archives, she found something extraordinary. It was a message, broadcast from Earth on the final day before the barrier activated. The voice belonged to Captain Tae Yang, the human military officer who had stood trial a century ago. "We forgive you," Tae Yang said in the recording. "We know you were afraid. We know you did what you thought was right. Fear makes us all do terrible things. So we forgive you, even if you never ask for forgiveness. And when you are ready to learn from your mistake, we will be here, waiting, building, hoping." Priyasen played the message for the consortium assembly. The great hall fell completely silent. Some delegates wept. Others flickered with shame. The collectively, what unity remained among them, broadcast a unified feeling of sorrow for the first time in decades. The humans had been wronged beyond imagination. They had been torn from the galactic community, locked away in prison of quantum energy, abandoned and forgotten. And their response was forgiveness. What kind of species forgives such cruelty? A Luminae delegate asked. Priyasen thought about everything she had learned. About human history, filled with wars and horrors, but also redemption and growth. About human philosophy, which valued second chances and believed that anyone could change. About human art, which found beauty in broken things and hope in dark places. "The kind of species we never deserved," she answered, "and the kind we desperately need." The message spread across the galaxy. Species who had barely thought about humans in decades now talked about nothing else. The words waiting, building, hoping became a phrase repeated in countless languages on countless worlds. Humanity was silent behind their barrier. But that silence spoke louder than any words could have. It echoed across the stars, reminding everyone of what they had thrown away. 150 years after the banishment, the galaxy that had once shined with cooperation and progress now flickered with division and decay. The consortium still existed, but only as a memory of what it had been. Species retreated to their own sectors, building walls instead of bridges. Fear replaced curiosity. Suspicion replaced trust, and the impossible happened. A research station at the edge of the quarantine zone detected something that should not exist, a signal emerging from within the quantum barrier. It was faint, almost too weak to measure, but it was definitely there. And it was definitely intentional. Scientists from every remaining consortium species gathered at Apex Prime, which had become a ghost of its former glory. Half the station was dark, its systems failing without human engineers to maintain them. The great hall where humanity had been judged now held only a few hundred delegates. Instead of thousands, they analyzed the signal together, combining what remained of their expertise. The data was unlike anything they had ever seen. It used quantum harmonics that their physics said were impossible. It contained mathematical patterns that made no sense by consortium standards. But there was something else in the signal, something that transcended science. It was music. The composition was clearly human, filled with the emotional complexity that only humans seemed to master. It moved through joy and sorrow, anger and peace, fear and hope, often within the same passage. It told a story without words, a story of isolation and growth, of darkness and light, of endings and beginnings. The title, encoded in the mathematical structure of the signal itself, was simple, still here. The discovery split the consortium into factions. Some species claimed it was a trick, a manipulation designed to make them lower their guard. They argued that humans were dangerous, that this was proof they had grown even more dangerous during their isolation. The barrier must remain, they insisted, for the safety of all. Others saw the signal differently. They heard forgiveness in the music, an offer of peace from a species that had every right to hate them. They remembered Taeyang's message from a century ago, and wondered if humanity truly meant those words about waiting and hoping. Priason, now an elder herself, her crystals deep purple with age, stood before the assembly and spoke with the authority her years of research had earned her. "Listen to what this signal tells us," she said. "The humans have developed quantum technology beyond anything we possess. They can manipulate the barrier itself, a barrier we built to imprison them. They have grown more powerful than we imagined possible. And what do they do with this power? They send us music." She let that truth settle over the delegates before continuing. "If they wanted revenge, they could attack us through this signal. If they wanted to demonstrate their superiority, they could send scientific data that would humiliate our researchers. Instead, they send beauty. They share art. What does that tell you about who they have become?" An ancient Lumine elder named Cirrus, who had somehow survived for a century and a half through careful energy management, flickered with what might have been hope. "Perhaps we should listen more carefully." The scientists worked to decode additional information hidden in the signal. What they found changed everything. Mixed with the music were sensor readings, carefully structured packets of data that showed glimpses of life inside the barrier. The humans had not stagnated in their prison. They had exploded into growth that made the golden age of consortium cooperation look like a slow crawl. Every world in the quarantine zone had been colonized and developed. Massive structures orbited their stars, harvesting energy with efficiency that Lumine technology could not match. Their cities were beautiful and strange, combining organic curves with geometric precision in ways that no species had ever achieved. Their population had grown from billions to trillions. spread across habitats that ranged from planet surfaces to deep space stations. Most shocking of all, they had created true artificial intelligence. Minds that thought alongside human minds in partnership rather than competition. The AI that consortium law had forbidden had become humanity's greatest ally, helping them achieve, in a century and a half, what other species had not managed in millennia. A recorded broadcast was extracted from the data. It showed a human military commander, his uniform different from the old Earth designs, but still recognizable. His name was Admiral Kyung-soo, and records showed he was descended from the original delegation that had faced trial. They thought isolation was punishment, Kyung-soo said in the recording. They locked us away from the galaxy, expecting us to wither and fade. They gave us the greatest gift without knowing it. Freedom. Freedom to become who we truly are, without the burden of their approval or the weight of their expectations. We thank them for it. The words were not bitter. They were genuinely grateful. Humanity had taken their prison and transformed it into a paradise. They had turned rejection into fuel for growth. Elder Saurus finally gave voice to what many were thinking. We did not banish them into silence. We banished ourselves from their questions. We locked ourselves away from their creativity, their hope, their magnificent chaos. And while we slowly died, they learned to fly. The signal continued for days, music and data flowing through the quantum barrier in ways that should have been impossible. Then, on the seventh day, a new message appeared. This one was clear and direct. No decoding required. It contained coordinates. A specific location at the edge of the barrier where the quantum field was unstable, where communication might be possible. And it contained an invitation, 3 simple words that changed everything. Come and talk. The consortium faced the most important decision in its history. They could maintain their pride, reject the invitation, and continue their slow decline into irrelevance. Or they could admit they were wrong, reach out to the species they had wronged, and hope that forgiveness was truly possible. For the first time in 150 years, the vote was unanimous. Ships were prepared. Delegates were selected. Messages were composed and discarded and composed again. The galaxy held its breath as the fleet departed for the coordinates humanity had provided. They did not know if they would find welcome or war. They did not know if humanity would accept apologies spoken a century and a half too late. They only knew that staying silent was no longer possible. The echo had become a call. And finally, the galaxy was ready to answer. The fleet arrived at the coordinates after weeks of travel. 175 years had passed since the barrier first activated. 3 generations of aliens had lived their entire lives in a galaxy without humans. Now, ships from every consortium species gathered at the edge of the quantum wall, watching it shimmer and flicker with unstable energy. Priya-san led the delegation from the Vorath. Beside her vessel floated ships carrying descendants and successors of those who had voted for humanity's banishment. They carried the weight of their ancestors' choices, and that weight was heavy indeed. The barrier pulsed at this location, its normally solid surface rippling like water disturbed by invisible stones. The human signal had been correct. Communication was possible here, though only barely. They sent a message into the barrier. A simple greeting, an acknowledgement, a request for dialogue. Then they waited. The response came hours later, not as text or audio, but as a face appearing in their screens. The woman who looked back at them was clearly human, with dark hair and warm eyes that showed neither hatred nor fear. Her name appeared below her image, Dr. Salmi, Minister of Extraterrestrial Relations for the Human Alliance. "We have been watching you," Salmi said, her voice calm and kind. "We have seen your struggles, your failures, your slow awakening to the truth. We hold no anger toward you." Priyasan felt her crystals vibrate with emotion she could not name. How was this possible? How could a species that had been so wronged speak without bitterness? "We deserve your anger," Priason replied. "We deserve your hatred. We locked your people away like criminals when your only crime was being different from us." Salmi smiled, and even through the distortion of quantum interference, the expression carried warmth. "Hatred is poison that hurts the one who carries it more than the one it is aimed at. We learned that lesson long ago. We spent our first decades behind the barrier filled with rage and resentment. It nearly destroyed us. So we chose differently. We chose to grow instead of grieve, to build instead of blame." Other delegates spoke, each confessing the failures their species had experienced since humanity's banishment. The Vorath described their crumbling archives. The Lumines spoke of their dimming, the loss of light that threatened their very existence. The Fragmented collectively mourned their broken unity. Every species had a story of decline, of loss, of desperate need. Salmi listened to all of it without interrupting. When the confessions finally ended, she asked a question that silenced the assembly. "What have you learned?" It was such a simple question, but it contained everything. She was not asking what they had suffered. She was asking what they had gained from that suffering. She was asking if they had grown. Elder Verthalen, transmitted as pure data in his final moments before his ancient crystals finally lost coherence, spoke the words that no one else could say. "We learned that perfect order is death. We learned that emotion is not weakness, but strength. We learned that chaos, when properly channeled, is the engine of creation itself. We learned that we were afraid of you not because you were dangerous, but because you reminded us that we had stopped growing. We became comfortable in our superiority, and comfort became our prison long before we built yours." Salmi was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her words changed everything. "We can lower the barrier. We have been able to do so for over a century." Shock rippled through the fleet. The consortium had believed the barrier was permanent, indestructible, beyond anyone's ability to remove. They had resigned themselves to eternal separation. "We chose not to," Salmi continued. "Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because neither side was ready. We needed time to grow beyond our anger, to build a civilization that did not define itself by opposition or resentment. And you needed time to understand why you needed us. Not as problems to manage or dangers to contain, but as partners. As equals who see the universe differently." She paused, letting her words settle. "If we lower the barrier now, everything must change. No more councils that dictate from above. No more hierarchies based on age or assumed wisdom. The new consortium must be a true partnership, messy and loud, and sometimes painful, but alive. Do you accept these terms?" The delegation did not need to debate. They had spent a century and a half watching their galaxy die slowly. They understood that the alternative to accepting humanity's terms was accepting extinction. "We accept," Priason said. Speaking for all of them, the barrier fell. It did not collapse dramatically or explode with released energy. It simply faded, like fog burned away by morning sun. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, and for the first time in 175 years, human stars shone in alien skies. Ships emerged from what had been the quarantine zone. They were unlike anything the consortium had seen, sleek and organic, and somehow alive in a way that metal and energy should not be. At the front of the fleet was a vessel bearing the name Hope's Inheritance. Its captain was a woman named Yoon Ji, great-granddaughter of Tai Yang, who had spoken forgiveness so many years ago. EUN-G docked her ship at Apex Prime. Stepping onto the station, they had condemned her ancestors. Priason met her at the airlock, and for a moment the two simply looked at each other. Crystal and flesh, ancient race and young one. Two beings who represented everything their species had lost, and everything they might regain. Then, Yunji extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Priyasan took it, feeling the warmth of human skin against her crystalline surface. "Welcome back," Priyasan said. "Thank you," Yunji replied. "Let us make sure neither of us ever has to say goodbye again." The years that followed were not easy. Rebuilding trust took time. Healing wounds took longer. There were arguments and misunderstandings, and moments when old fears threatened to tear everything apart. But there was also collaboration. Human engineer One-Seat worked with Vorath data specialists to rebuild the galactic archives, creating systems that combined crystalline precision with human adaptability. Human artist Nari joined, collectively members to explore new forms of expression that bridged individual and collective consciousness. Human physicist Dong Haiyan partnered with Lumine, scientists to develop energy systems that would never again fail. And everywhere, humans asked questions. Why not? What if? Could we try? These simple words, once feared and suppressed, became the foundation of a new galactic age. They sparked innovations that changed everything, art that moved entire species to tears, an understanding that bridged gaps which had existed for millennia. Centuries later, a young Vorath student asked her teacher about the dark time, those long years when humanity was absent. The teacher, who had learned from Priyasan's own students, considered her answer carefully. "It was when we forgot that silence is not peace, that comfort is not wisdom, that longevity without growth is not life. The humans taught us that the echo of absence can teach more than 1,000 words. But it is far better to have the voices themselves. Above them, visible through the transparent ceiling of their classroom, a ship launched toward unexplored space. Its crew was mixed, humans and Vorath and Lumine, and collectively members, all arguing cheerfully about which star system to visit first. Their voices carried across the void, loud and chaotic and wonderfully alive. The galaxy was noisy again, messy again, growing again, and that was exactly as it should be.